The short story, The Word of Unbinding, is one of Ursula K. Leguin's very first forays into her narrative universe of Earthsea. And already in this story, we see some of the really key elements at play. I want to begin by just reading some of the first lines of the first paragraphs to give you a sense. Where was he? The floor was hard and slimy, the air black and stinking, and that was all there was, except a headache lying flat on the clammy floor. Festin moaned and then said, "Staff." When his Alderwood's wizard staff did not come to his hand, he knew he was in peril. He sat up, and not having his staff with which to make a proper light, he struck a spark between finger and thumb, uttering a certain word. A blue will-o'-the-wisp sprang from the spark and rolled feebly through the air, sputtering. A little bit later, he must have been overspelled from behind by surprise, for the last memory he had was of walking through his own woods at evening talking with the trees. Lately, in these lone years, in the middle of his life, he'd been burdened with a sense of waste, of unspent strength. So, needing to learn patience, he'd left the villages and gone to converse with trees, especially oaks, chestnuts, and the great alders, whose roots are in profound communication with running water. A little bit later in this, so who had spellbound him and shut him in this reeking well? Who? He demanded of the walls, and slowly a name gathered on them and ran down to them, like a thick black drop sweated out from pores of stone and spores of fungus. Vole. So already in these first two paragraphs of this short story, we're seeing a lot of key themes being put into play. Festin is a wizard. Vole, we don't quite know about him yet, although we find out in the next paragraphs a good bit, is also going to be a wizard. There are some other key themes connected with nature. Festin goes and talks with the trees. And it's not just a communication of human being with nature. Nature itself is a body of communicative action and engagement. The alders communicate with other things through their roots. So this is very typically Leguinian, we could say. Magic is going to play a central role, and there are structures and rules to it, classifications that we can talk about. At the same time, there are ways in which magic can be used or misused, and there is a connection to the wider world as well. This is really, in many respects, a story of conflict. There's a conflict between the two main characters, a protagonist and an antagonist. A conflict that is going to involve magic itself as a tool. In a certain respect, going beyond mere instrumentality, though, thinking, trying to outsmart each other, that's a central aspect of this as well. And then we could say commitment. Festin is going to commit to something by the very end that will allow him to have the victory, even though he appears to be the vanquished one. So let's talk about these two characters. We have Festin. We've already got to know him a little bit. We know that he's middle-aged. We know that he feels like maybe some of his power has been wasted, and so he is learning patience by strolling around and talking with the trees. He's described both as a wizard and as a warlock, as a young warlock, in a paragraph a little bit later on. And we find him here in this stinking well, in a trap, in a prison cell beneath the ground. So has he been taken from his island home? Earthsea, by the way, is a number of islands within a much larger body of water. So let's look a little bit further on. As a young warlock intent on his training, he had not paid much attention to talk about this full person. I can protect this island, he'd thought, knowing his untried power, and he had returned to his oaks and alders, the sound of wind in their leaves, the rhythm of growth in their round trunks and limbs and twigs. the taste of sunlight on leaves or dark groundwater around roots. So we find out that he's connected with the natural world as part of what it means to be a wizard or warlock. So he sees nature in a way that other human beings might get glimpses of, but don't necessarily get. And it's part of Leguin's exquisite storytelling that she's helping us to enter into this world that obviously we, not wizards, not warlocks, let alone mages, can share with this. What about this other person, Fol the Fell? So there is an entire description. Well, not a description of the person as such, but a description, let's call it, of the function or of the exercise of his power. Festin had heard first long ago of Fol the Fell, who is said to be more than wizard, yet less than man, who passed from island to island of the outer reach. These are the islands that are on the periphery of Earthsea, undoing the works of the ancients, enslaving men, cutting forests and spoiling fields, and sealing in underground tombs any wizard or mage who tried to combat him. Refugees from ruined islands told always the same tale. He came at evening on a dark wind over the sea. His slaves followed in ships. These they had seen. None of them had ever seen Fol. There were many men and creatures of evil will among the islands, and Festin had not paid much heed to these tales. So it's not as if Fol is the only bad person in the world. This is not a everything on the side of light versus everything on the side of darkness or good or evil kind of story. There is plenty of evil to go around, but Fol is in some respect a catalyst, a concentration of evil within this world. And that's a great phrase, more than wizard but less than man, prefiguring what we're going to see at the very end of the story. So what does Festin do? This is where we get to these conflicts, right? He's going to use magic. And here we're going to see some of the many servants of Fol the Fell involved in this, particularly trolls, right? And guards people. But also the effects of some of the spells that he's got set up. So Festin is going to use three kinds of magic, incidentally, right, in the conflict, because he also does use magic to heal himself, and he uses magic to send the little, will-o'-the-wisp up there to light the place up. But the magic that's really going to count for something is transformation, what Leguin is going to describe as the spell of homecoming, and then finally the Word of Unbinding. So what's transformation? It's turning into something different. He doesn't just transform into animals, although he does take the form of some animals, for example, a hawk. He also transforms into a gold ring. He transforms into a mist. He transforms into an odor of cooking meat, right? And with each of the transformations, he is making an attempt by transforming his body, by taking on a new form, which is a bit dangerous because, if you stay in that form too long, you can become the thing, as we find out later in some of the Earthsea novels. By taking on that form, you accept the vulnerabilities of it. So he takes on the form of a mist. Then there's a hot, dry wind that would destroy the mist, that would destroy him, right? He takes on the form of the hawk to fly out. He gets hit by an arrow, which turns out to be his shoulder as a human being. And with each attempt at transformation, Fol, through his magic or through his servants, has managed to outthink Festin. He's set things up in his favor. And Festin knows that the odds are against him already. He says, listen, I'm stuck in this guy's dungeon. I don't have my staff. I'm at half my power. And we see progressively, as he tries and tries and tries things, he is not just losing time. He's losing blood. He's losing energy. So there's a second kind of magic that he ends up using, and in this case, it's not so much about saying the proper word or name. Instead, it's something else that occurs. So he strikes a will-o'-the-wisp, right? And lit the reeking air, the same dark mist he had seen as he flew overhanging his forest and little towns of his land. It was up to him to protect that land. He could not attempt direct escape again. He was too weak and tired. Trusting his power too much, he had lost his strength. So the transformation exhausted the resources that he had. Shivering with cold, he crouched there, letting the fireball sputter out with a last whiff of methane, marsh gas. The smell brought to his mind's eye the marshes stretching from the forest wall down to the sea, his beloved marches where no men came, where in fall the swans flew long and level, where between still pools and reed islands the quick, silent seaward streamlets ran. Oh, to be a fish in one of those streams, or better yet, to be farther upstream near the springs, in the forest, in the shadow of the trees, in the clear brown backwater under an alder's roots, resting hidden. So this is him in the dungeon, sort of thinking about his land, which he knows intimately. This is not something that somebody who'd only seen a documentary could visualize, right? This is by direct experience, by communication, by what we, when I was a child, called woodcraft, being able to walk the trails, and it could be marshcraft as well. Now, Leguin says, this was a great magic. Festin had no more performed it than has any man who in exile or danger longs for the earth and waters of his home, seeing and yearning over the doorsill of his house, the table where he has eaten, the branches outside the window of the room where he has slept. Only in dreams do any but the great mages realize this magic of going home. But Festin, with a cold creeping out from his marrow into nerves and veins, stood up between the black walls, gathered his will together till it shone like a candle in the darkness of his flesh, and began to work the great and silent magic. So there is a deliberative aspect to this, but Festin is less drawing upon an art that he has learned and more something that is available there in nature, should we call upon it. That is a correspondence between our desire for home and the actual place. And he winds up being in that home, which is not a house, but rather his forest and his water. The walls were gone. He was in the earth. Rocks and veins of granite for bones, groundwater for blood, the roots of things for nerves. So another transformation has taken place, but this is a transformation of a different sort. Like a blind worm, he flowed through the earth westward, slowly, darkness before and behind. Then all at once coolness flowed along his back and belly, a buoyant, unresisting, irresistible caress with his sides. He tasted the water, felt current flow, and with lidless eyes he saw before him the deep brown pool between the great buttress roots of an alder. He darted forward silverly into the shadow. He'd got free. He was home. And he winds up taking on the shape of a trout hiding under the alder roots. But he's found by a servant of Fol, a troll. It takes many attempts, but they catch him. And he is put back into the shape of a human being and put back into the dungeon. So he is the second great kind of magic, surpassing that of transformation, has failed. And now he's close to death. His ribs have been cracked by the squeezing of the troll. What is he going to do? Here's where he outthinks Fol and realizes something, and then decides to undertake a different kind of magic. He says, why has he not killed me? Why does he keep me here alive? Why has he never been seen? With what eyes can he be seen? On what ground does he walk? He fears me, though I have no strength left. They say that all the wizards and men in power who he has defeated live on and sealed in tombs like this, year after year, trying to get free. What if one chose not to live? So Festin makes a choice. He whispers the word of unbinding, which is only spoken once. And Leguin says this was not transformation. He was not changed. The body, the long legs and arms, the clever hands, the eyes that had liked to look on trees and streams lay unchanged, only still, perfectly still and full of cold. But the walls were gone, the vaults built by magic were gone, and the rooms and towers and the forest and the sea and the sky of evening, they were all gone. And Festin went slowly down the far slope of the hill of being under new stars. He's now in a different place, and we'll talk about that place in just a moment. But what does this allow him to do? He's able to call out his enemy. Festin is now dead. He's in the place of the dead. He's realized that Fol himself has his power by having crossed from the border of death into life as, you could say, a malevolent spirit exercising control in the world through all of these functions, the servants, exploiting, destroying, imprisoning. But now, in the realm of the dead, Festin can take him on. And he does so. He calls out Fol by his name, and he forces him to go into the dead body that he had left behind, and Festin keeps watch on it. Here's the description. A long way they went over dry lava flows from the great extinct volcanoes, across spurs of silent hills, through valleys of short black grass, past towns or down their unlit streets, between houses through whose windows no face looked. There was no change here, no day would come. Festin drove the other before him till they reached a place where once a river had run, and a dead body lay, that of an old man, naked, flat eyes staring at the stars that are innocent of death. "Enter it," Festin said. The full shadow whimpered, but Festin came closer. Fol cowered away, stooped, and entered into the open mouth of his own dead body. At once the corpse vanished. Festin is resting there. He said he must keep guard until Fol's body, sent back to his grave, had turned into dust, all evil power gone, scattered by the wind and washed seaward by the rain. He must keep watch over this place where once death had found a way back into the other land. And this is the first description that we have of what is going to be called the dry land. Notice that it has things like towns and houses, but nothing changes. There is no wind. It is gray, and there is just existence, not life. That is where Festin goes, sacrificing himself so that he can make something valuable, something meaningful out of his inevitable death, and to undo some of the evil, if not necessarily the damage, that is done by this malevolent thing, Fol, who had crossed from death as an old man back into life to conquer, to exploit, to cause fear and dismay among so many others. And this is where the story comes to a close. So a lot of very interesting thematics and what are going to become key ideas of Earthsea already being brought to bear within the fabric of a very quickly told story here in The Word of Unbinding by Ursula K. Leguin.